Okay, I think we can slowly get started here. I am Sam Christie Dangermond. I'm a director for academic affairs at the Kansas Board of Regents. We want to thank you all for being here today to join us on the third English faculty professional development session put on by the wonderful Melanie Burdick, Kathy McCoskey, and Casey Reed. We really appreciate their doing this for all of us. And with that, I'm going to hand the reins over. You guys let me know when you want me to pull up the presentation.
Thanks for the nice intro, Sam. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I think we're ready to get going. Um, so today we are going to be talking through a little different facet of thinking about English co-requisite development, specifically how we support students' non-cognitive and affective needs. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, we are in session 3. We'll talk to you a little bit more about what we're going to do in session 4, which is going to be a working time. We'll have that split between time when you can work with colleagues at your institution and time when you can connect with folks across institutions. So, like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder, as with all of these sessions, we'd love to have you participating as actively as you are comfortable doing so. Cameras on or off, taking breaks as you need, using that chat, and using gestures to raise your hand or share a feeling. We're going to be sharing a lot of information, and as usual, having points where we can participate and talk amongst ourselves. And unexpected pet and small child Zoom bombing, always welcome. Always welcome. Next slide, please. Today we have 3 main objectives. We're going to explore some theoretical frameworks that can support students' non-cognitive and affective needs. We're going to try to explore and discuss the range of what these needs can be and how they might impact students' experience and learning. And then we're going to share and crowdsource a range of ways to incorporate non-cognitive and affective support into classes. Next slide, please. So we're going to go ahead and get going with our first section, and I'm going to pause this for just a second and share some information with you in chat. So a little bit of just research-based context for us to think about why is it that students are leaving our classes? That's a really important thing to think about as we're thinking about non-cognitive and affective needs. Um, Sometimes when we think about co-requisites, we tend to get stuck in thinking just about the literacy development needs. But we have a lot more going on because our classes tend to be part of a student's first year experience in college. So they're trying to figure out what does it mean to be in college. And there are a lot of things impacting their lives. So I've thrown a couple of resources out to you, one from Inside Higher Ed from last year, talking about 3 different resources that talk a little bit about why students think about leaving college. And within all of these lists, including the last resource, which is actually one from our field that is specifically was asking students in English classes about why they were considering leaving classes. Financial issues inevitably come up, motivation and life challenges, different kinds of mental health needs, and then cost kind of factors more specifically related to college. And sometimes this will come up as the Gallup and Lumina Foundation information provide as emotional stress. So you might hold on to those resources and some of this information as we continue today, as it's going to be helpful to come back to this as we're thinking. Sam, if you wouldn't mind jumping to our next slide, please. So just as a quick reminder, when we're talking about co-requisites, the reason we're talking about non-cognitives is because this is really core to how co-requisites have been framed within our field since the beginning. So these are a couple of slides from one of our earlier presentations, just as a little reminder that it is core to co-requisites that we make sure that we are integrating student success curriculum and that we are incorporating additional academic and non-academic support as needed. Next slide, please. So again, just as a reminder, these are a couple of slides from Peter Adams, just talking about what are some of the reasons that we might think a student might not pass our class. And sometimes, like I said, we tend to focus on the content kinds of things, the things around literacy development. And oftentimes it's not any of those things. Next slide, please. And instead, it is all these other facets of their lives that are impacting them. Life happens. And so that's what everything we're going to be talking about today is going to be: how do we help support students in ways that are doable and at the same time are not getting us out over our skis too much too, right? Because we have to think about what our boundaries are within our classroom. So next slide, please. And as we do this, we want to keep in mind what this might look like for students. And those are some of our affective issues. So when this was originally kind of theoretically framed, this was framed as those life issues and then those affective issues all being part of what we're talking about when we're talking about non-cognitive issues. So that's what we mean by that. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Melanie now.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to trace some of the theoretical frameworks for this through educational theory, and some of this might be information that you have already studied, but I want to put it into context of this co-rec framework. So this is you've probably seen this image before. It's a pretty famous one of a classroom. And, you know, original university teaching was the traditional lecture review test. And I know when I was in college, we would have a midterm and a final in many of our classes, and we would go to class in these ginormous lecture halls. And I think that has been the tradition in higher ed for so long. It sometimes feels unnatural to break from that, but I'm going to share with you a few theoretical frameworks that will help us do that. Next slide, please. And so I'm sure that many of you have read bell hooks. This was a quotation that I think is really relevant to the work we're doing as we're getting ready to do co-requisite or continuing to do co-requisite teaching of first year writing at our schools. So in engaged pedagogy, which bell hooks writes about, she sees the problem with education is when it is disconnected from student experience. When it does not seem relevant, when there does not seem to be a purpose of what they're learning, and when students feel that they're learning things in a vacuum. So I like this quotation where she talks about education as a form of socialization that made her feel diminished if she and her professors regarded one another as whole human beings. And I think a lot of the affective issues that we are going to need to address for these students in our co-rec sections, it is thinking about them as whole human beings. All right, next slide, please. And this quotation I think is really interesting because it discusses education as conformity. And if you are a good student, you learn to be obedient to authority. And I know we're doing lots of interesting things right now with ungrading and different types of assessment that we try to change up that kind of system of authority and obedience. But when it comes down to it, you are the authority in your classroom. You are assigning a grade. You have that kind of power. So we need to think carefully about how do we see the students who do not conform to the expectations of a college classroom? What about students who are not following the rules as we understand them in college? How do we see ourselves as authority? How is that different from the way that our students are seeing us? All right, next slide, please. So two theoretical frameworks that I think are especially pertinent to co-requisite education are the social constructivist theories and the critical pedagogy theories. And again, this is probably a reminder of things that you read in grad school, but I just wanted to put these front and center. The social constructivist theory definitely portrays students as full human beings because it is the theory that acknowledges that we learn through human interaction and that learning is a social activity. A teacher's role is not to stand up and lecture every day and then test students, but to design learning experiences. So that's a little bit different, that are collaborative and take place within a classroom community. It's also the teacher's role to create that classroom community where students feel that they can collaborate. And then the other framework, the critical pedagogy, students, I think this pushes up against that idea of obedience because we're teaching students to question and critique everything that's around them. The teacher's role is to be a transformative intellectual who teaches students to think critically about the status quo and their place within it. And this framework does identify education as a political construct where there is a teacher as authority, but that authority figure is helping students find their own authority and ways to critique the world around them. All right. Next slide, please. So, I want you to think a little bit about a time when you were not in school. So not sitting in a classroom, but somewhere else, and you were trying to learn something, and it was challenging it was too challenging for you. You were struggling to learn it. So, for example, I'm thinking of a time when I was on a camping trip with my husband. We were not married at the time, we were engaged, and he was teaching me how to paddle a canoe, and we were doing a float trip. And I was very frustrated. I was having a really hard time. I was splashing myself and getting all wet. And I think I actually hit him in the head with a paddle once. So think about a time where you were trying to learn something. It was challenging for you. And I'd like you to put that in. You don't have to give me the whole experience, but tell me what it was that you were trying to learn. Put that in the chat so we can see some of the experiences that people have had. A time when you were learning outside of school and it was hard. Driving a stick shift, Kathy. Oh my gosh, taking care of a newborn. Gosh, you guys, this is great. Sam, can you take down the slide, please? These are great examples. Would anybody feel comfortable? I mean, I shared my experience with you. I'll tell you the emotional side of that experience. My husband and I were just, we were engaged. I was trying to impress him because I wanted to be this outdoorsy person that I knew he was, and we were going to like start our life together and do all these camp outs and all hiking and all this stuff. And I remember feeling really embarrassed that I just couldn't get it. And there was a lot of anxiety and emotion at that moment. Is there anyone else that would feel comfortable talking about their emotional state while they were having this learning experience?
I would tell about learning to fish. My husband first taught me how to fish and then took me on his dream fishing trip, which was salmon fishing in Alaska. And he was so excited. He loved to eat fish too. And so the mission of this trip was to bring home as much fish as we could to stock the freezer. And I have to tell you that I stood next to a river in Alaska, in boots, in cold in July, and I learned to fly fish. He had taught me how to fish the way we do in Kansas. And I went to Alaska, and I immediately on this trip had to learn to fly fish in an unusual way, which was a constant motion cast. And one of the days I did that for 8 hours, and I had such a desire to catch a fish because it meant so much to him, that when I finally managed to, after many hours, I finally managed to hook one of those salmon. It was an unbelievable feeling because I just had that persistence, like had that, and I think that when we think about our students, I don't know that they don't always come to us with that stick-to-itiveness, that persistence, perseverance through not hooking a fish for hours. And so the moment, right, when I felt that tug was absolutely exhilarating. And I think about how do I, as a teacher, then help them find that moment, right, of exhilaration.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, you had that motivation, that internal motivation to learn that and to not give up. Anyone else want to share a different experience?
Well, I was I was trying to learn how to golf because my husband's a golfer. What is it with, I mean, these are all like we're trying to learn something for our husbands. I thought, if I'm ever going to see him on a weekend, maybe I should learn how to golf. And I tried. I took lessons. I went to they had a special like ladies' night at the golf club and there was like a beginners group, and I tried, and it's hard. And I think for me, I didn't have enough of that internal motivation to stick with it, and I like being good at something. And I'm good at a lot of things. Golf is not one of them, and I kept trying to get good at it. And to get good at it, you have to practice. And we're not, if you golf, it's like hours. Like you golf around. It's not something you do for an hour. No, and I mean, I will tell you, we've now been married 25 years, and this was probably in our first year of marriage that I did this. And I find other things to do on the weekend that I enjoy while he goes golfing, because I never could get it, and I gave up.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Need to sell my clubs.
Let's do one more example. Maybe somebody who did not learn something for a spouse. I feel like. Or
I saw that somebody posted difficulty backing a trailer, and that jogged my memory immediately. The first thing, when you gave the prompt, the first thing I thought of was trying to drive a rented car in England, which is a lot like trying to back a trailer up. Like about half of what you know about how to drive is useful, and about half of what you know you have to reject and overrule and rewire and rewrite. And so that's frustrating being in those situations. And that, I mean, the thing that I said was trying to teach myself how to freestyle rap. I drive around with these blank beats going in my car because I'm trying to teach myself how to sort of spontaneously freestyle so that I can rap battle my nephew when we get together at Christmas time. And that too, like the frustration is actually analogous. It's as strange as it sounds. Like I'm using language, which is this thing I've been using all my life. And I've always been fairly proficient in it. I'm a fairly verbal person. But the things that I know about using language are all about choosing words carefully and reflecting on my use of language and self-editing and composing things that are sort of, I mean, all of the skills that freestyle rapping, invites you to cultivate are these, thinking on the fly, never looking back, never thinking about the thing you just said, only looking ahead, looking toward the next rhyme and having no self-consciousness and just sort of complete a kind of bravado that allows you to have sort of creative freedom and all of those, even though it's a verbal skill, it works against just all of my natural tendencies. And so there I am once again trying to back the trailer up, trying to get that boat in the lake. We're back to fishing now.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Well, if you could pull the slides back up again, Sam. I asked you to think about a time outside of school because I think most people most people who go into education, not everybody, but most people who become educators, they have had really good experiences in school. They have been very successful in school. So I wanted you to think about a time where it was very frustrating and you were in a more unnatural space than what I would assume is school is more natural for you. So I want you to think about that feeling that you had, that frustration. I did finally learn how to paddle a canoe, and part of it was because my husband is really good at making me laugh also. So I think he did some silly things and cut the tension and made me laugh. And I don't know if you actually broke through and learned the thing that you were trying to learn, but you might want to reflect upon that. Maybe it was something like Laura shared where you had this internal motivation. Maybe it was somebody helped you see it in a different way. Maybe you just kept pushing through because you like to be good at things, or maybe you didn't ever learn it, and you might want to reflect upon that as well. But I think that can give us some empathy for our students and help us understand the emotion that they are bringing to our classrooms when it's uncomfortable and it's emotional, and it's not necessarily just skill level that we're dealing with. All right, next slide, please, Sam. So a lot of you probably seen this before, but I wanted to also just remind you about Vygotsky's theory of ZPD. And this is a really important one for our students who are, I think all of our students, but especially the students who are in our co-rec sections, that there's these different, Vygotsky says there's these different zones of learning. There's a zone, the inner zone there is the things that you can already do. That's the comfort zone. I know how to do that. And often this is the place where students will get bored and they're like, I already know this. And they zone out because they're bored and they don't see, that they're growing or moving or learning. The outer ring is the anxiety zone. And that's where students are unable to learn. It's beyond their grasp. And sometimes that's like with me and the canoe, that I was so stressed out about doing something. I was so anxious about how I was appearing, and that I just couldn't learn it. Sometimes though, it's that students just don't have the skills and they're unable to learn. What we want to try to make sure we provide for all of our students is that ZPD, that zone of proximal development, where they are reaching, they're moving in a direction of learning, but it's not beyond their reach. So we can do that, of course, by providing lots of focus on their progress by scaffolding, by giving models, lots of rubrics. Vygotsky is all about small group work, lots of practice. And I think what's really cool about this idea as it is related to the co-requisite program is that we are helping students fit into that ZPD skill level and non-cognitively. So we're appealing to, we're giving them lots of practice in the co-requisite section of things that might be outside of their ability to learn without some support, but we're also providing them with a place where they can feel really comfortable and emotionally able to learn. I'd also want to say that if you've ever heard of flow state, like by Csikszentmihalyi, I think that's how you say it, Csikszentmihalyi, that is also only accessible in that ZPD. So if you want your students to step into that state of flow where they're enjoying their learning and time kind of goes away, we want to make sure we're setting things up so that they're in that ZPD. All right, next slide, please. And then a newer take on ZPD, which I think also is really important to co-requisite education, is Van Leer expanded this, and she expanded it for language learning, but I think this works really well with writing instruction too, where she says we can help students self-regulate their learning by giving them these different ways of reaching ZPD. So in the top left quadrant, it's more of those inner resources, similar to what Laura was talking about, the self-motivation, but also there's lots of experimentation, independent practice, there's reflection. So remembering what worked, what didn't work, that is the investment in the process and not giving up. So there's that piece that we want to make sure students feel safe making mistakes and not giving up. In the top right quadrant, this is where the teacher steps in and creates models and rubrics and gives lots of low stakes practice. You can provide also assistance from other peers. So peer response can be something that works in this area. In the lower right-hand quadrant, interaction with equal peers. So this is when you get students together in a group and they're working through a problem together and they learn from each other and ask questions of each other and they grow together. So this is another way that we can create that ZPD. And then finally, matching less capable students with more capable students. The more capable student then teaches and learns it becomes more solidified by their teaching, and the less capable peer rises up and learns the skills. So this is another, that lower left-handed quadrant, that's another reason that we want those co-rec students, though we have some time with those students on their own, it's really important for them to be in the traditional 101 classroom at the same time, working with their more capable peers. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to touch on a little bit on how this works in an online class, and I wanted to refer you to a couple different resources. We might be able to put links to these in the chat in a little bit. But Amara Decour in 2021 wrote an article about humanizing the online class. And if you notice, in 2021, we were mostly all teaching online. So a lot of us were not comfortable with that. And this was a really important article, especially for that time period, to help folks think about how to I humanize the students who are in my online class that I may not see well, I'm not seeing them in person. I'm not really talking to them. So she gave some really important ideas. And I think the first one is valuable. Assume responsibility for student engagement. So how do you make students feel like they want to be engaged? How do you motivate them to be engaged? You provide relevant content. You provide interactive learning. You provide lots of safe spaces for them to make mistakes, lots of time to practice. You should check in on your students' lived realities so that you know what they're going through. And again, the context of this originally was during the pandemic, so it was especially important for us to check in. But I think for the correct teaching that we're going to be doing, we do need to know what's going on with our students' lived realities and see them as whole human beings. And then make sure that you clearly communicate the relevance of your course online and face-to-face. I think that's important. And address contemporary realities. Obviously, during the pandemic, that was a big deal, but you might want to consider how are politics, how are other social and cultural realities affecting your students right now? Just consider that and address them and let students know that you're aware that these things are going on in the world. I think can be really helpful. All right, next slide. Is it too early for a break? What do you think, Kathy and Casey? Should we keep
I
Keep
get-
on?
going.
What does the group think?
Keep going.
Cheryl says keep going. What do you guys think?
Keep
Anybody
going
else?
and maybe get done early.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, it's so hard to know what it's going to play out like.
Yep.
So, okay, super. We got it. All right. So yes, so let me make sure I got everything ready. Everybody can hear me, right? Yes, okay. Okay. So this section, connecting with a whole student, is really boots on the ground examples and strategies. And as we go into this part, I'm thinking about just the experience and the expertise of all of us. So no one has this all figured out, but it's always valuable to share examples and practices with each other. And that's really what I'm doing here, is things that I've found useful in my practice and those of my colleagues, and learn from other people. So we will have a spot within this where we'll ask for some sharing. And of course, as we go along, don't hesitate to stop with questions. That's perfectly fine. So this is the kind of topic that lends itself to that. Okay, so next slide, please. So we want to be setting the tone in our courses for relationship and trust, so that students can be as effective as possible as students. And one way that I have consistently found this one way I've found this to happen in my courses is to just simply use index cards at the beginning of each face-to-face class and have students, fold them like table tents and just put their first and last name on the card and place it there so I get to know their names. I have them at the end of class leave those where they're sitting, and then I collect them in order and then just come back to my office and go through them. And it really helps me get their names down really fast. But inside their card is information for me only, not information that I would share with other people in the class. And the things that I ask are, where are you from? And do you live on or near campus? That's one question. Or do you commute? So I'm situated in El Dorado, so I do have quite a few students who are commuting from around perhaps Wichita, which is about 35 minutes away. And I do like to be aware, especially with bad weather, what are people going through to get here, and car issues and things like that. Now, what kind of activities are you in, either on campus or even off campus? Like, what kinds of things do you spend your time on? And so that's a good way to get to know them. I used to ask what classes they had, but now that we have the Aviso system, I really don't need to do that. I can just look that up easily myself without making them write that down. Placement information is really not something I do anymore. I think that's related to what I said here about what previous courses have you taken. So I always ask, is this your, in English Comp 1, I'll ask, is this your first time to take it? Or have you taken any other English courses in college? And so it is a good way to find out from the beginning if they're coming. If I'm in a standalone English Comp 1 class, I know maybe they've already taken some developmental courses, which, you know, right now we still have some standalone ones or have had in the past. Or are you retaking? And so it's a good way to get that out between us, so I know who's retaking, and there's no shame in that, but just to help them know how to focus this semester. Also, I have asked about, like, what is your goal to be here? What brought you to Butler? Sometimes I ask major, but I do find sometimes I get students stressed out. And then I do ask, what about, oh, you're welcome, thank you. Oh yes, thank you, Melanie. What about job? Do you have a job? If so, how many hours a week do you work? Which is a good way to get into a conversation if needed about, like, that's, you know, a lot of hours to be working and doing all these credits, if that's the case. I have found, so next slide, please. I've found that those little index cards help me get to know their names quickly, which of course is a huge step to building relationships and making me feel more comfortable getting to know them right away. But also it helps with things like conferences. So I am working on this semester getting individual conferences back into my composition classes. I kind of slid out of that after COVID. And it just took a commitment and a way to figure out my schedule to get them fit back in. And I just went through that, I think that was week 4 with my Comp 1 class this semester. And it was so rewarding, you know, to have a 10 to 15 minute conference with each student. And then I bring up that little card, they filled out the information, and it helps remind me, okay, oh, this is where you're from. And oh, that's right, you're in football. And for them to see, I'm interested in you genuinely. And that's huge, right? That opens the door to that relationship and building trust, which I want to get back to in a minute. I think it's a good idea to emphasize communication through your syllabus policies. And I'm going to give some examples in a little bit, including the expectations and the behaviors that you're looking for. That your classroom is a safe place for individual and group communication and growth. And of course, there's so many ways to promote that in our courses. That could be a whole nother discussion. Maybe we'll have time to have if people want to. And then establishing my presence, our presence as instructors, just like what Melanie was talking about in our online classes, you know, making that a priority to be a presence, not only in the classroom, but also online, but also through communication, emails, video instruction, even for face-to-face classes, something they can watch later to learn more about a skill and practice it. Announcement, feedback, you're having specific feedback, for example, for their essays, and then having them later reflect on those. And then during the pandemic, I did use a Google phone number. I still have it. It keeps telling me that it's about ready to go away. And then I text one of my colleagues and say, yes, I'm still using it. Look, please don't delete this. But a Google phone is a free option for you to have a phone where students could text you or call you and you wouldn't be giving out your own number. I know there's other options. I don't know if Jabber is still around, but it was during the pandemic. And also, of course, Teams is a way that you can do that. But I haven't used it for a while, but I do keep it in case a student would need to want to talk to me, or when I'm home on the weekend besides email. And I want to have that option and not be worried about giving out my own information, but still providing that communication. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So if you just look over this list, and could you put, everybody just put in the chat maybe which two of these that you hear about a lot from students, you have students experience? What are the ones that you tend to hear about or see the most? Depression, overwhelmed, anxiety, lack of motivation, homelessness, illness, car broken down, illness, mental health, deaths, death in the family, anxiety, overwork time, overwhelmed, vehicle problems, illness, family emergency and anxiety. Someone wasn't having a baby in the hospital. Can I please have extra time? Right, right. Yes. These are all things I think we are all hearing so often, right? Yes. I used to be part of the group that would think that was ironic when so many grandparents died during the semester, but I haven't had one time this semester that a student told me that I didn't believe. You know, I remember being the age, 18, 19, 20 in college, and it is that time period where your grandparents do tend to pass. And all the ones that I've experienced with my students telling me this year, I really believe we're genuine. And just the grief that the first time somebody significant in their family passes, no matter who it is. And so, we're seeing a pattern for sure of so many kinds in the chat. So does it matter where you're teaching? Oh yes, lack of daycare, depression, anxiety, right? So this is a heavy load for them and for us, indeed. Okay, next slide. So we have to remember the students are bringing in so much with them. So obviously, helping support and figuring out how can we deal with this as in our role is way beyond our usual focus, right? It's not content planning and instruction. It's not assessment and grading. It's not probably what we all signed up for, in some cases, but we find ourselves there. And as caring people, especially those of us, in developmental education, I think we do see ourselves often as people who want to support and nurture in an appropriate way. So next slide, please. So here's some ideas besides what I've shared already. If we think about our network of people on campus and in the community that we know, and we think about that as what we can impart to our students, that can really empower them and help them grow in how they can advocate for themselves. So I think it's important to take time just to think about what's an individual student perhaps experiencing, and then who could help them, and how could I get them to that help. So we have, of course, financial aid, advising, career services, tutoring, writing and math labs, activities coordinators and groups, librarian services, disability services, counselors. At Butler, we have something called a care team. We have an athletic advisor, the service desk, that kind of thing. I had a student quote I'm not going to read it to you, but I had a student quote on my mind when I made this slide where a student said, "Thank you so much, Mrs. Mahoski, for walking me over to advising today. I was really just about ready to stop coming to college." And that was a good reminder to me of something I heard at a conference about introduce students to people, not to offices. And so, to take time, say, I'll just walk you over there, and not just this is where advising is, but let me introduce you to the receptionist who will in turn, introduce you to an advisor. And so it's empowering if our network becomes their network. Some new things that I think we need to stay on top of what new things are happening on our campus at Butler. In the last couple of years, we've had a new laptop initiative, revised tutoring approach, different cafeteria lunch hours that helped the athletes with their schedules, new campus printing options, food bank changes, and availability. So staying on top of those, being committed to staying on top of those, and thinking, who do I need to tell about this? How can this help my students? So that's really obvious, but I think we all need a good reminder of that. So next slide, please. And part of this is perspective, trying to see through the eyes of our students. So it's so easy to not do this, but think about, where would I go to study if I lived here on campus? I like quiet, comfortable places to study. Where would I go? And what would I do when the library closes fairly early? Ours doesn't stay open very late because of traffic and staffing. So where are other places that I could tell students to go study? Where can they find printers and computers during the day? How do they print? What do they know about things like this class only lasts until May? It doesn't go on until December. I think we probably all had people asked us, how long does this class last? Does it go the whole year? Oh my goodness, no, it does not. So thinking about what they don't know, and what would be helpful to share with them. Where can you get a snack or coffee? How do you get a campus job? You'd think it'd be easy, but sometimes those positions are hard to even figure out where the descriptions are. Do they buy back this book? Is it okay for me to write in this book? What happens if I write it and they don't buy it back? So I think just reminding ourselves to think through the eyes of students. Next slide, please. All right, so I think it's one way to do that is to use your course materials and your activities to increase awareness of resources on campus. So one thing you could do is put in your syllabus, if you have the flexibility in your syllabi to write, like put a section about resources. We have that flexibility with the syllabi system we have here at Butler. So I have a resources for you section at the end of my syllabus that includes, tutoring, the online writing lab, the food bank, just really the counseling, really practical things. And then part of my syllabus quiz is having them look at that section and tell me 2 or 3 things that are helpful to them that they think they might want to try or they have used before. When we were preparing this, Casey or Melanie reminded me of the value of having speakers come into class. And I think that could particularly work in a co-requisite course where you have more flexibility about what you are talking about and how you're using that class time. So maybe someone coming over during when enrollment's starting, someone from advising coming over and talking about it's time to get enrolled. This is what you need to do. Or it's time to get started on your next FAFSA. Scavenger hunt certainly would be one way to have students learn about resources, making that an assignment with points. An embedded support, I'm trying to remember what we meant by that. There's a lot of things that could mean. Melanie or Casey, do you remember what we were referring to specifically there?
I know that here at Washburn, we have embedded tutoring
Mm-hmm.
in our first year writing classes. So that might have been a reference to that?
Well, I know Stephanie Joyner at Barton certainly has that neat program going. So, and before I asked for feedback, I wanted to share the story with you guys before I forget. So, about 2 weeks ago, I came up to Topeka for the meeting about Complete College America and had to get a sub for my Tuesday class. And my Tuesday class is my Comp 1, and then my following that is my Fundamentals of English class, my face-to-face ones this semester. And I always get nervous for my co-requisite students because I know that having a sub can be hard on them, just because they've built this trust with me. And so for Composition 1, when I talked to the sub later, who was a great colleague of mine, he's a great teacher, he said, yeah, everything went well, and this is what we did, right? And then he said, but then I went to the second class, and only one person came. And I knew in my heart that that would probably happen. Well, out of 10 people, I think 3 or 4 of them had already excuses. I mean, good excuses. They were planning to not be there. And we worked through that, of course. But then the remaining 5 or 6, when I got to see them, I said, so, what happened? And one of them said, just really quietly, it's hard for me to really trust a sub. And I thought that was so amazing that he would even share that with me. He was one of my track athletes. And I know that in college, it shouldn't be about, that, you should be ready to handle things like that. But that's who we often have, somebody who's built trust with you. And then even the change of somebody like that can be like, well, I don't even want to be there. Perhaps in high school, because they had to stay with a sub, there wasn't a choice, but this time they had a choice. They just left, right? So that's what's on the line with us, right? Is building these relationships. I want them to be comfortable with subs. I want them to get more resilient. But early in the semester, that's where this young man was at. So, okay. So what are ways, this is for you to share, please, in the chat, everyone. What are ways that you infuse an awareness of resources into your classes? Great. Melinda, tours to Student Success and Writing Center. Cheryl, having a Writing Center tutor consultant come into class, not just to announce services, but to help with an activity. Cool. Deborah, in-class visits from Counselor Trio, Writing Lab, also making visits to those places. Laura, I teach online exclusively. I think hyperlink resources, which is feedback on essays, good. Yes, just in time. Greg, first week tours. Jeannie, I have a resources module in Canvas. Jennifer, bring in guest speakers. Janice, I asked for students to share in discussion what they've learned from the syllabus and what they most liked. You're in syllabus announcements. Anna, in the syllabus and announcements and class discussion. Deborah, syllabus sections on resources. Selena, embedded tutor in class once a week. Oh, that's so great. I wish I had that. Mary Beth Harris, bring in tutors, library workshops with librarians. Yes. Curtis Becker, I do a walking tour with freshmen at the beginning of the semester. That's so neat to get out with them like that. Melissa, tutor visits the classroom. Sometimes I take them to the library. Selena, oh yes, the tutor, embedded tutor helps during writing days to look over proofing and editing and bouncing off more ideas. Oh, that's wonderful. Francis, for on-campus tour, on-campus classes, I take them to the library, introducing the librarians. And Susan, director of tutoring, makes a presentation. So lots of field trips and visits. That's great. So we're all thinking this, right? One new thing Butler, I don't know if anybody else is doing this, but librarians are able to embed into our Canvas shells. And so if a class is working on a research project, the librarian is there also with any material she wants to put into the course. And then also they could email her through Canvas too, just like me. Yes, library trips. Right. Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Oh, good. The campus pantry. I feel like this time of year, I need to remind students about those things that I put in my syllabus. That was a long time ago when they read about those. And especially things like the food pantry, you know, because they didn't think about it then or didn't need it then. Yes. Okay, next slide, please. Preparing students for next steps. This is another thing about just helping think about what they're going to need and thinking ahead for them, with them. Like I said, you know, students sometimes ask, you know, well, when does the semester end and what happens after that? And if they're comfortable with you, they might ask you those questions rather than just try to figure it out themselves. You know, when do I start applying for financial aid again? How do I enroll? So I had somebody who needed to drop my course early and move home last Thanksgiving time. Well, he didn't drop it. He stayed in it and he was going to finish it online due to things going on at home. And he said, well, how do I do that? You know, so to explain to him the steps, who to talk to, how to make those changes, how to make sure you're not re-enrolled next semester because you're not coming back. So talking about, you know, what happens if they drop a course, if they're thinking about dropping your course, you're letting them know that they need to talk to financial aid too, to find out the consequences of that. They may not know that at all. Talking with them about, you know, if someone's having financial issues that they make you aware of, helping them find scholarship opportunities. I know at Butler with our foundation, there's a scholarship portal that is for a different type of scholarship that not everybody for some reason realizes. And so pointing that out and getting them to somebody in the foundation to help them with that is a big step. And then helping them launch if they're thinking about like transferring resumes, you know, who could they talk to about those things? So being that contact person, not just their professor. Next slide, please. And then finally, all this talk, right? It's so easy to not have boundaries. And I have to remind myself of this all the time. So this is just a little book that has helped me so much with this list. Kathleen Gabriel's Principles about Boundaries. So her book, Teaching Unprepared Students, Strategies for Promoting Success and Retention in Higher Ed, is a great little book. And this list is just one of the things in it. So number one, all students, including those who are unprepared or at risk, can be lifelong learners. Just reminding ourselves, everybody can do this, you know, at some level. Number two, significant changes require commitment and time. So, you know, it's correct for me to insist and to encourage practice and time. Number three, struggle is a necessary and important part of life. It's hard for me to see students struggle. I have to remember that this is part of becoming stronger, becoming more, becoming better at these skills. And then number four, students must accept responsibility for their learning process. Again, there's a line there between us and them. Number five, this is probably my favorite. Professors should never do for students what students can do for themselves. Yes, thank you, Selena. So, you know, it's sometimes easy to step in and feel like, well, I could communicate that for them so they don't have to send that email or but we have to help teach them to advocate for themselves. And then a continuous revelation by me, for me, is my students' expectations of themselves are not the same as my expectations for myself, right? So if I feel like, oh no, I think they're going to get a C, well, you know, a C is a good thing for a lot of people, right? So putting myself back in their own shoes, in their own frame of mind, not my own. So, next slide. And I think we're ready for Casey, right?
Again, everyone. And I'm throwing a few more resources in the chat to supplement some of the ideas that Kathy and Melanie have been sharing with you. Just to give you some different approaches to think about, because there's really a spectrum of ways that we can do this work. We can do it in, just kind of little infusions here and there, or you can take a whole class, both the first year writing class as well as the co-requisite class, and make a theme out of things so that assignments actually get linked up. And I've certainly done all throughout the spectrum of approaches, using some different things. So I just wanted to throw some more ideas out in the chat about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more in the next 2 slides about how you might bring this out to the rest of your department. If you are a, one representative, or maybe just a couple of representatives from your department, in case that's useful, because I know some of you all are kind of representing for your institution. And some of you all also work at institutions where you're going to have graduate students potentially doing some of this work, and a lot of part-time faculty potentially doing this work. So we know not everyone is here, and we want to make sure we provide some resources that might be supportive for having these conversations. Next slide, please. So we're not going to watch this video, but we are providing a video from Peter Adams, one of the ALP founders from Community College of Baltimore County, so that if you want to provide some professional development to your folks who are going to be doing this on the ground, this is not a bad video to show, so you don't feel like you have to do all of the talking necessarily. And Peter kind of talked through his experiences of figuring out all the things that we've talked about today, and why it is that it's so important to be taking into consideration these non-cognitive factors when we're trying to build out our co-requisite classes. Next slide, please. And then this is actually a resource, and Sam, if it's possible, can you click on that link and open up this document for us? Might take a second. This is a document that I created some time ago, actually, for another institution, and I have updated recently for KU for both first year faculty across the board. So not just in first year writing classes, but in any kinds of classes that students traditionally would take as a first year course. I've also done it for parents at our orientation sessions last summer to have conversations with them, and just provided it straight to students. And this is something that you all have, get to have access to this document if you want to take off with it and make your own version of it that is specific to your institution. And essentially what it does is, first, and I'll talk you through a couple of the things up at the top, it's going to provide some general guidelines about how to infuse some success content into your courses. This is actually something that I've done now at multiple institutions with both English faculty and faculty across different disciplines to help them take their calendar and just get in there and go week by week and figure out how they're going to infuse student success content and things that are going to relate to supporting students with those non-cognitive and affective sorts of factors. Thanks, Melanie, for throwing that in there. And then on the left-hand side, what you're seeing are typical stress points for students through kind of on a month-by-month basis throughout the course of a semester. And then on the right-hand side, it's directly talking straight at those of us who teach first year kinds of classes about the kinds of things to try to do or think about in your classes, including some links to some different resources that might be useful as well. So I want to go ahead and talk us through a little bit on these general guidelines. One, always be unpacking that hidden curriculum for your students, okay? One of the things we know is that increasingly, not just at two-year colleges, but at four-year colleges as well, we have more and more students who are first-generation college students, who may be low-income college students, who haven't been exposed to a university or college experience before, or even if they have, right? Increasingly, we have all these students going through dual credit classes. It is not the same, right? And so we want to make sure that we spend some time really unpacking what certain terms mean, what may be happening throughout the course of the semester, all the kinds of things that if students start feeling stuck, they're less likely to be engaged in your class and to continue on. So as much as we can unpack those things for students, that is helpful. Try to really take into consideration your student demographic. Oftentimes, you know, you have the demographic for the entire institution, but in our first year courses, we're getting everyone, right? And so we're really oftentimes seeing a broader spectrum of students than folks might see in more niche sort of career or technical sorts of areas. So the more you can get to know about your student demographic and some of the potential needs that they might have, the more you can kind of cater what you're doing in your classes and those student success strategies and the non-cognitive considerations as much as possible. And then also consider, Kathy talked about this a lot, campus as well as any community partners that you can potentially work with. One thing I like to share with folks, because I have been in charge of a lot of first year experience classes, as well as academic support at different institutions, is that we have to demystify for students. It's not enough to just mention in the syllabus or to mention a couple of times in class that you want a student to go to, say, a writing tutor or the writing center, for instance. What we actually have some research and writing center studies that shows it's helpful if students can actually see a mini version of what happens in a tutoring session in about 10 minutes in class, whether that's by video, so it can be really accessible to students online and students who don't come to class, or whatever, because they don't know what happened. And so, and there's a lot of stereotype threat about going in to our campus services that makes students not want to go in. No one wants to be stigmatized as a person who needs tutoring, right? There's a lot of stigma that's attached to that from their high school experiences and just culturally. It's good if you don't even use the word help, is what I tell people. We're here for support, we're here for development, and we're here for collaboration, right? And so the more you can demystify, destigmatize those kinds of experiences. I talk about my own experiences of using those kinds of services myself and to help with those kinds of things too. So, so the more you can do those kinds of things, the better. Try to prioritize just-in-time needs and resources. So, and that's part of what this whole sort of stress calendar does for you is so you, here are the kinds of things that are probably coming up for students. Here are the kinds of things that you want to emphasize so that you don't just bombard them with, like, I know, listen, I love to do this too. I love a good campus scavenger hunt. Does anyone else like doing a little campus scavenger hunt in your classes? Maybe, right? I'm a fan of them. They're great. At the same time, it can't be the only time students hear about the resources because they're not going to remember. And it's only when they get, you know, they really start getting stressed. I always tell people, right, you have sort of this schedule throughout the semester. I call it like the waves, right? Every 3 to 4 weeks, you're going to have a bunch of assignments coming due and tests. And that's when the stress levels tend to go up. And that's when it's helpful to make sure students are reminded about certain kinds of resources. Or for instance, one thing to know is that our major breaks in our calendar. So if you have any kind of a fall break, you have a spring break, and Thanksgiving. That's where you're most likely to lose students. And so around those break times, we need to find ways to engage students. I actually have some documents I'm happy to share with you all that help with getting students to engage in planning during those breaks to keep them going and motivated. But they're also usually stressed because there's financial stuff going on. Now there's like home life stuff going on if you have students who are going back to a place, or if you have commuter students, they're having to spend more time working or in a home environment that they haven't been in as much perhaps. And so anything we can do to connect them with resources. And I always say you need to kind of prioritize your top three. And this is based on the research I shared with you all at the beginning of this presentation. They need some kind of, because we're in writing classes, right? They need that writing support, and that's one, and library support. Those are things that we understand well, I think, because they relate to our content. But they also need some kind of connection with any kind of counseling resources and mental health resources that you have on campus and in the community, because of all of the mental health and emotional sorts of stressors that are keeping students from continuing on, as well as financial. So anything you can do to get students connected to anything that's going to help them related to financial resources, those are the three biggies that I always recommend, because again, we all have, our campuses are trying to do so much, and I love it. I love all the resources. But if you have to prioritize, because we all have only so much time, those are the big three that I usually tell people to try to make sure to prioritize. And then if there's some ways that you can try to kind of systematically make sure you're doing some kind of check-ins with students. Some faculty like to do like quick 1-minute papers each week just to check in and see, like, tell me something about how class is going, or something where you're confused, or something that you're worrying about that might keep you from continuing in class. Those kinds of things. Some people like to do surveys where they can really tightly control the response options. Some folks like to do individual conferences. I know that's a real time commitment, but I just want to throw out a range of some options there for you. And that really, as a baseline, y'all, what the research shows again and again and again is it's all about you and how you come across the students. You don't have to be super touchy-feely nice, but they need to feel like you care. They need to feel like they matter to you. And I've seen a range of personality types be able to do a great job of communicating. Students matter, even if they're not like touchy-feely, sorts of folks doing lots of emotional labor. They just need to know that they matter. So just a few things to think about there. Any questions or thoughts, or even if you all want to throw some more ideas into chat about other things you all do related to any of the things we just talked about, that would be great. So I think the more we can crowdsource ideas, the better. Yeah, I'm just checking through. Screen.
It'd be okay just to even unmute, wouldn't it, Casey, if they want to talk about it?
Absolutely. Some of you all
This
might
is
have.
This is
Okay, go
Cheryl
ahead.
at Fort Hays. And I think sometimes just talking to students about our own struggles, I think it's hard for students to imagine that, Dr. Duffy ever struggled as a student, but I would talk about, using counseling services when I was in grad school, or I'll talk about, financial, how I would eat the same thing every, cook beans, and I don't even think you can buy ham hocks anymore, but I can remember going to the grocery store and ham hocks were really cheap. And, I could simmer that with dry beans and a can of Rotel and, eat on that for a week. And I think it's good for students and to know that you struggle. And I always tell students, Are you feeling overwhelmed? Good, because if you didn't, I would worry that you weren't a student, because it's just part of the drama of being a student is feeling overwhelmed, but just know that you get through it. And I tell them this true statement, that there was not a semester, not one semester that I was in college that I didn't think, why am I doing this to myself? I have friends who are not in college and they are out sunbathing this afternoon, and I am in the library. And and then you say, well, I can deal with it for a semester. So you just do it a semester at a time, or maybe a month at a time, or a week at a time, or a day at a time, whatever you need to do. But I just think letting students know that struggling is part of the reality of life, but also specifically of being a college student. And it makes that reward when you do finally catch that dang salmon, that feels so good, but you have to miss it a lot of times and stress about it too.
I love everything you're saying. Cheryl, it's really reminding me of, I mentioned earlier, hope and hope theory. And there's actually a specific, Nicole Stephen did some work specific to writing, for writing classes. It's called Writing Hope. And the idea with that is that hope theory is all about goal attainment and helping people achieve goals. And it gets people thinking about what's their motivation, and then what are the specific steps, they call it pathways in the research, to getting to those goals. And that what research shows us, Gallup's done a lot of research about hope across the world, and that folks in the US tend to be higher on motivation, but really low on pathways. And they don't necessarily know all the steps it's going to take to get. And the more that we can help unpack that for students by giving those stories and those examples, the two things kind of work together. So if people can have high motivation or any kind of amount of motivation, but if they don't know the pathways, then their motivation can go down. And so we have to help them understand those pathways to help buoy the motivation as well. And that's so important in our classes, to be having those informal conversations all the time. You don't even have to talk to students about hope theory. You just do the thing, and that's helpful. And your comment was also making me think about some conversations. I'm actually getting my MSW right now, in part because I saw how much the affective experience of students in my classes and in my services was impacting their ability to navigate college. And one of the things that I've been having a lot of conversations with counselors about is that we've gotten a little better about talking about mental health things, but we haven't gotten better at acknowledging and helping support people with just discomfort. The fact that we are going to have discomfort throughout life that is not about a mental health kind of need necessarily, but that's just part of life too. And it's tricky to have those conversations, I think, because we don't want to sound bootstrappy or anything about it, but that it is important that we acknowledge that discomfort, and that we part of that is being part of that experience and getting through it. So yeah, that's great. Other thoughts? Anybody wanted to share? There has been a lot of work in our field around trauma-informed approaches, so I did provide one resource around that. And just sort of ecologies of writing and how we support students with creating ecologies that really take into account the affective habit, right? Those kinds of things. Yeah, one thing that I started incorporating into my syllabi is there's some research suggesting if students actually commit to when and where they're going to do their work, and it's broken down more, they're more likely to actually do it. And so I would actually incorporate an extra column into my syllabi where I would have students at the end of a class write down when and where, when and where, when and where, or have them get off their phone if they like to do it that way, when and where, to help just very quickly. Because again, we're all strapped on the class time. So that's great. Okay, I think we're ready to head back perhaps to our presentation. been a great conversation today. And that's fine. So we are getting to the point where it's time to do a little preview for session 4. So as an FYI, that will be happening in April. And our ask of you is to bring a working group for your institution and be prepared to select topics from our session 1 handout that you would like to workshop. As a reminder, because if you're like me, I'm not remembering what happened back in December. That handout breaks down different stages and facets of the co-requisite implementation process that you need to consider. So we have obviously been primarily talking through what is happening in your classroom, but there's a lot more to this, right? There's how are you choosing instructors? How are you providing professional development? How are you doing assessment work, right? What are the implications of the credit hours for other programs at your institution? I know for me, every time I implement one of these, everybody gets up in arms about credit hours and where those credit hours are going, right? We're not going to be making any of those decisions, by the way. We are not your chief academic officer. I'm going to be very clear about our boundaries there. But that handout does include a range of the different things related to implementing co-requisite space, right? Classroom space, all that kind of fun stuff. So we'd love it if everyone, could we maybe get a link to that so that folks could spend a little time taking a look at that and maybe just start thinking about what are some of the topics that you think you might want to spend some time brainstorming and talking through and digging into the details of during that working group session. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have time to work within your group, and then we're going to also have times where we have you mixing it up a little bit so that you can hear ideas from folks from other institutions, especially if you're feeling stuck around a particular issue.
Casey, I'm sorry, I'm looking for a link, but I don't know that we have it linked on our website or the KBOR website.
I think I got it. Tell me if that's
Okay.
the right one.
Thank you.
It is. Yay.
I'll make sure this is on our website too. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Thank you. That's awesome. So data collection needs, placement considerations, prerequisite model decisions. You may still be making some decisions around that. We don't know. Course design, other course related sort of needs, faculty selection and professional development, assessment, course spaces, scheduling systems issues, institutional education and support, and then we also provided some resources. And it would be great too if you do have a chief academic officer or a department chair or a dean or someone else who feels like they want to be part of these conversations. Grab them in. This is a great time. And we know how it goes when Kathy, Melanie, and I were talking. We were just talking about how hard it can be to carve out time to have these conversations, and we just want to make sure you have some space to bring it all together and dig into some of these kinds of things. Again, without us, we are not pretending that KBOR is signing off on any particular method or way of doing things, nor are we saying you have to do any particular thing. We just want to make sure you have some time for that. Kathy, Melanie, any other things you want to fill out?
I don't think so.
Maybe just see if anyone has questions about the last session or anything that we shared.
What's the date for that last session?
April 4th, I believe. Let's see if that's a Friday.
It's April 4th. Yes, Friday,
Yeah.
2 to 4.
Yeah. Yes.
And again, you'll be able to sign up on the KBOR website.
Yes, I will get registration opened up this afternoon.
We don't have any questions or topics. Wow, early today, y'all. I know you're sad about that.
Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.
It's been lovely, as always.